Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, find out how a simple system update knocked DreamHost offline for nearly 2 days, and how the MS Updater Trojan works. Plus, we'll answer some frequently asked DNS questions and a war story you'll never forget. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is Jupiter Broadcasting Systems Network and Administration Podcast. This is episode 43, and we recorded this one live on February 2nd for release on Friday, February 3rd. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is provided by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week for all 43 of them in a row is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, man.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in.
Welcome back to TechSNAP, dude.
Yes.
We got a big show now. Last week, obviously, okay, it was an hour and a half show. That's by its very
show ever.
Yeah, by its very definition, that's a big show. This week, we're kind of doing a little of everything. We've got some great news coming up. We've also got a feedback section, and we've got a great roundup section, and we've even got a war story.
Yes, a big one.
So, I mean, this is probably going to be another really big show, isn't it? Yep. All right. Well, is there anything you want to cover at the top, or should we just jump right into the news to get rocking?
No, I think we better get started.
All right. Well, the first story that's on our news is a story over at threatpost.com about an ongoing targeted campaign after the defense and aerospace industries. And we've kind of noticed this just following the stories, haven't we, Alan?
Right. We've seen a lot of these stories. This one has a lot of interesting details about what was actually happening, though. And
okay.
That's why I included it.
Let's do that. That sounds interesting.
So, this particular set of research is about a specific Trojan called MS Updater Trojan. And it was used in very targeted attacks against defense and aerospace industry systems. And it seemed the goal of this was to get, industrial intelligence, to learn about manufacturing processes and schematics and basically to industrial espionage, to steal information. And this also lends itself to the idea of this state-sponsored cyber warfare.
Right, right.
Because when you're talking about defense and aerospace, it's, the people that breaking into it are most likely either other defense and aerospace companies or more likely other countries that want that information.
Right, I guess it's sort of the equivalent of like back in the day during World War II, where if a plane came down, they'd pull it apart bolt by bolt and try to rebuild something similar to that so that way they could compete.
Yes.
Only now these nations are coming and getting these things electronically.
Yeah, well, or a better analogy is, they would send spies or recruit spies into the country to try to steal blueprints.
Sure.
Or recipes for chemicals or whatever.
Or maybe a great cake. I mean, the recipes for a great cake are always quite valuable.
Yes.
Now, the skeptic in me thinks, too, that it also is a very convenient target, this digital boogeyman that we can just blame for state-sponsored attacks. I mean, it could also be, really, truth be told, it could just as easily be corporate-sponsored attacks against a competitor, just so that way a competitor can get a leg up, and then they just blame it on state-sponsored attacks, either for legal reasons to make it easy. I mean, the skeptic in me wants to always kind of say, hey, now, wait a minute, is this 100% accurate? But I guess when you kind of break it down by the targets, it sort of becomes obvious because there's really only a few major players.
If you're another defense contractor in the same country or in a friendly country to the one, patent laws are going to come up when it's like, oh, look, our design is the same as this other design.
Right.
Whereas if it's a hostile country, they wouldn't, patents don't really apply the same way when it's a country that's hostile to the country that they stole it from, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess I just want to believe that there's not these countries that are arming against us. I actually find it more comforting to think that it's internal. It's something that's just being blamed on them because to me, the idea
it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah. That's probably, you're probably exactly right. That's a very pragmatic way to look at it. Okay, so what else?
So this Trojan was spread mostly through very targeted spear phishing. So they would send these infected emails not to just blanket people or even to blanket a company, but specifically to people who they knew would have access to the sensitive information that they wanted to get.
Right. That makes sense.
And the goal of that remote administration Trojan was to steal that sensitive or classified information, like designs and blueprints and schematics and so on. As much information as they could get about, whatever was being developed.
Right. Yeah.
And the Trojan also changed very rapidly to try to avoid detection, and used a number of different methods to actually infect the computers. Some of them were zero-day PDF exploits, and fake conference invitations. So rather than just some fake conference or whatever, it would be a conference very specifically targeted at the person they were sending the emails to.
Yeah, we have a picture of one here, don't we? Do you want me to show that?
So, and some of them, they actually took the real flyer for the conference and then infected it.
Yeah, that's okay. That's pretty slick.
Yeah.
It looks legitimate too. I mean, we're looking, if you're watching the video version, I'm showing it right now, and I would open that if I was, especially if I was expecting to go to that conference.
Yeah, or some of the conferences they pretended to be sending these flyers on behalf of are like the IEEE Aerospace Conference or the Iraq Peace Conference or whatever. So if you're a defense contractor, you're expecting to get an email like this. Yeah,
you get a lot of them. I mean, like I signed up to go to conferences, a few times over the last probably 5 years, really, maybe three out of the last 5 years. And now I constantly get junk for different conferences. I just expect it, although I don't open up the attachment.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, that such consumer-level software like Acrobat Reader is consistently a vectored point for entrance into the network.
Almost everything in business is done through PDF files because they're more portable than Microsoft Office.
Well, and if they are done through docs, it's not like that's much better. I mean, because
there's just as many macro problems there.
Yeah, so you're screwed either way. Although one could make the case that an environment like Google Docs kind of reduces the risk in this sense, especially.
Although I've been getting fake Google Doc emails.
No
ones
kidding.
With URLs that it's HTML, so it looks like it links to Google, but it actually links to something that's not Google.
So they're like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen that yet, but that makes sense. Of course that would show up.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is there's no hope. There's nothing that can be...
Yeah, it's just, people have to look at the source and stuff. But the big problem here mostly is that email is not that secure of a method of transaction.
That's true.
Things like domain keys and the sender policy framework help a lot, and using those to score your spam system. But a lot of it is just.
What about using virtualization to solve this problem? So say, because I know VMware offers something where you can actually push down over the network remote virtual machines, and the user runs inside this virtual machine. Or you can also do things like isolated virtual environments like VMs, like ThinApp and things like that, where the application runs within a virtual machine. So then it's sandboxed in a sense.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. And so the communications between the infected machines and the command and control servers often took the form of regular HTTP traffic, either GET or POSTs, and they used a URL structure that made it look like the URLs from Windows Update. And that's how the Trojan got the name Microsoft Updater Trojan, because it would actually be the URLs, the exact same URL format that Microsoft Update uses, except for the parameters at the end were actually an encoded bit of information about your machine. So it'd be like your machine name, what version of Windows you had, and a bunch of other information it would be sending to the command and control server.
That's clever. That's actually kind of clever.
And then they also included Windows error reporting URLs, and then later some fake Google searches with a couple of random numbers thrown in there.
Huh.
And so it, the URL would look like a Google search, but it was actually the IP it was connected to was not Google. And then the URL would have encoded information about your computer in it, so that the command and control server would be able to identify that computer.
There's no way average users are going to navigate around that.
Right. Well, they not going to know it's happening. But
it's just totally beyond their capability to detect. I mean, it's just
right. Well, yeah, and it's just HTTP traffic. You don't even know it's happening. But if you do have some kind of intrusion detection system, it might have a rule that says, all right, this looks like Windows Update, let it through, or don't flag it as suspicious. Or even if it does flag it as suspicious, you'll see the URL and it looks like Windows Update, and you're like, oh, just ignore that.
Yeah, and who knows what Windows URL updates really fully look like? It's all kind of obscured behind the UI anyway.
Mm-hmm. And then so also like you were saying about virtualization, the Trojan dropper that was actually attached to the emails that would actually get the Trojan and put it on your computer, was able to detect if it was running inside a virtual machine. It would try to execute a certain CPU instruction that isn't allowed to happen in virtualization.
Yeah, okay.
And if that failed, it would know it was in a VM and it wouldn't install the Trojan.
Okay. I mean, that is an incredibly simple way. Just try to execute something specific that that virtualized CPUs don't support. That's actually because I was wondering how would they know they're inside a virtual machine. Oh, gosh.
Well, there's a couple different ways. Like you can identify certain ones, like VirtualBox or VMware,
specific hardware,
the hardware name and stuff. But there's a couple of instructions that the virtual machine monitor built into your CPU won't let a virtualized machine run because they could modify something in the host. Right? So for security reasons, those are blocked. So by detecting that, you can be like, oh, hey, I'm running in virtualization. Let's treat things differently. So
it's interesting. It would just opt not even bother. So I guess the virtualized isolation approach would still work, but just for different reasons.
The reason they did that is because most researchers use virtual machines to test the viruses and to work with them, right? And so it made, it hampered their research and analysis until they figured out that's what it was doing. And then they're like, all right, well, we can throw real machines at this to sort it out. But, generally they just use virtual machines because it's so much faster to provision more machines and to snap back to a stock Windows install.
Snapshots, I've specifically used the snapshot features for experimenting with virus infections, just for fun, just for education or for troubleshooting. Yeah, and then you just snapshot right back.
I know a couple of people that work at like antivirus companies, and they do this kind of research all the time.
Oh my gosh, I used to work at an antivirus company. I can't believe I've never told that story on the show before. I used to work for an I'll share it. We got a big show. I'll share it. Maybe I'll think of a story and share it on a future episode.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
Okay.
So in the show docs, I have the blog of one of the researchers that did a bunch of stuff on this, and that's where we got the pictures from. There's also a PDF of the full analysis, including what those URLs look like and all the different techniques they use to get around security systems at these companies, and details about how they found out about some of this stuff and all that. And then also I included a link to a research paper on how to detect when you're running inside a virtual machine.
Oh,
and it talks about a number of the different methods, including, looking for like the VMware type devices or the QEMU type devices that you would see in VirtualBox, or some other specific ones for VMware where there's a fake IO port that VMware uses to do the clipboard back and forth.
Oh, interesting.
And you can detect that and so on. Or there's a couple of different CPU instructions that you can try to run. And if they don't work, that it's a virtual machine. And because that's a tiny bit of assembler code, it's a lot easier to write that in a virus in like shell code than it is to do that with a full program. Like if you had to try to write to a certain IO port to detect VMware, that's a lot more. It would take a lot more shell code than running the SIMD.
And it probably would change a little bit based on the host or the guest operating system too, how that works.
Right, and also, there's different versions of VMware, and then you have VirtualBox and Zen and KVM.
Right, yeah. All right, do you want to move on to the next story?
Sure.
This one's an interesting one. It involves DreamHost, which we covered last week. And
so last week, they were having some trouble with, they got breached into, and had to reset all their customer passwords.
Right, and then were DDoS based on the demand of everybody trying to reset their passwords, essentially from their own customers. But now they've had an outage related to like package update?
Yes.
Oh boy.
So they had this huge outage that took them quite a while to resolve because basically they had a policy that they would automatically install the latest updates from the repository on all the machines. This included virtual private servers and dedicated servers rented out to customers. So even, if you rent a dedicated server, it's usually so that you have root access and you control everything. But if you're renting it from DreamHost, it's probably because you're the kind of person that doesn't want to have to try to update the version of Apache in your dedicated server, right? They're like the semi-managed or whatever.
This is really... I mean, I hate to kick people when they're down. I really do, especially fellow system admins.
Yeah.
But having a policy to have updates auto-install on production systems is literally begging for this kind of problem. I mean, it is literally begging
especially I don't mean to hate on Debian, but Debian has a history of breaking stuff.
I love Debian. I totally get you on that, but it is just
like it was a couple of versions ago, but they randomly changed the command line parameters of the chpass command, which totally broke directadmin and a bunch of other control panels and automated scripts. With no announcement or anything, in a minor update, they changed the command line parameters of a command in a non-backwards compatible way.
Yeah. I've had also issues where I've had config files that were replaced when there wasn't a warning, even though it's supposed to ask if you want to commit changes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed on this blog post that we were showing here, there is 1,044 responses. In fact, 98% of the page is all of the comments. And the first comment is, lol. The guy's first lol.
There are some fairly troll-tastic people in those comments. I saw a couple of comments that are not fit to be discussed on air.
Oh, wow. So at least they're being, again, DreamHost is being awesome with their communication. I mean, they really are.
And
totally
they're posting updates like every 20, 25 minutes or whatever. But basically, their policy of automatically installing updates from Debian immediately turned out to be a bad idea. And anybody could have told them that.
That's just really embarrassing. That's what's such a shame.
So basically, something in one or more of those packages caused a bunch of dependencies to be uninstalled. So resulting in Apache, the FTP server, and in some instances MySQL either being completely uninstalled themselves or being unable to start.
There is a great Linux Sucks article somewhere in there. You remember that Linux hater blogger guy? Did you ever read that? This sounds like material for that. But again, it's not Linux's fault. It is how it was being administered. It really is.
In this case, it's actually a problem with the package system in Debian.
Well, but deploying it automatically. I mean, everybody tests, and you would identify that issue before deployment. My gosh.
Although one wonders why Debian didn't identify this issue in their own package before.
Well, did this bite a bunch of other people too? Then I
don't actually know.
Okay.
I don't keep up with Debian package news.
Right.
But like you were saying about overwriting config files, I know the FreeBSD package system, when it uninstalls a package, it only delete the file if the MD5 sum of the file is the same as when it installed it. So if you've modified a file, it doesn't uninstall it. And then when it goes to install the new package, it won't overwrite the config file because if one's already there.
Right.
And it always installs two config files, though. There's the regular one and then the regular -dist, as in the distribution one. So the dist will be updated if you didn't modify it to the default for the new version, but your original config file won't be erased.
Well, and I feel for them in the sense that if this story was DreamHost brought down due to an old, outdated version of Apache, we'd be making a lot of fun of them too for that. So I understand they're in a difficult position, and they wanted to be hyper on top of security updates.
Yes, and they said they've had a couple of minor problems before, but nothing like this. And you can ride the edge of the knife for quite a while, but eventually you're going to slip and get cut. And so it's better to be, you got to be just a little bit off that edge. You want to keep up near the edge when you can, but you can't really ride right on the edge.
I would also imagine, especially dealing with the scale of this, did they talk about like how they rolled back or what they could do to recover? Because if you figure the amount of servers that must have been involved.
That's why it took them so long to recover, is because because of what happened, there was no really automated way to do it, because when dependencies get uninstalled and stuff, especially with apt, it gets kind of crazy. So there was a lot of manual overrides and stuff.
Yeah, it gets very stubborn. It's very convinced this done what it needs to do, and what you're trying to do isn't correct. So
DreamHost is a very large attack target just because of the sheer number of servers and just domains that they host. And so they must work diligently to ensure those updates are applied to prevent massive numbers of those machines becoming compromised, because that could, just all those machines all of a sudden doing something malicious like scanning other website, the rest of the internet for old versions of WordPress they can compromise, could basically act almost just so much outgoing traffic it can drown their own sockets or their own pipes, and they wouldn't be able to, all the websites they host would be slower down because of the amount of infected machines trying to hammer the rest of the internet from inside their network.
Right, yeah. I wonder if they've looked into software like Puppet, which lets you do large-scale config management, and it supports Debian-based Linux distributions where you can do config rollback, you can do rollouts and things like that. This is how Reddit manages their Ubuntu servers, and they have like 200 servers that they manage with this thing, or more than that, I think now. And I've heard great things about Puppet, so it might. Maybe somebody. I'm sure people at DreamHost know about this kind of stuff, but it seems like this is a solution that might have helped alleviate some of the downtime.
Yeah, although their issue wasn't configuration as much as just packages.
I think it does software too, though. But you would have to use it for the updates too. You'd have to stop using like apt at the command line. So I don't know.
Yeah. So DreamHost basically had to manually resolve the dependencies and stuff for a number of the servers. And they couldn't do it in an automated fashion. So it took them quite a while of having basically all their admins being hands-on with servers and getting them back up one at a time, basically.
Wow.
Which included dedicated servers and virtual private servers belonging to customers, not just their own fleet of servers. And then, once you're into the zone of VPS and dedicated servers where somebody other than you has root access and installed some stuff, it gets all kinds of sticky because you don't want to, uninstall or change something they were doing, or, especially if the customer was trying to fix it while you were, in this 3 or 4 day window when things were screwed up. If the customer's in there trying to fix it and makes a worse mess, then it can be all kinds of problems.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And that could be really, especially if the customer, you're trying to get something done that's kind of time critical or sensitive. That could be,
yeah.
They're going to have a hard time coming back from this one.
I think so. Especially for the VPS and dedicated people.
Yeah.
So DreamHost has changed their policy regarding the updates so that they will now basically take the upstream packages, test them, and then deploy them in their own repository will then go out to the customer servers. So that they'll still be fairly close to, they'll be very quick about turning the packages around, but they will do some testing of their own before they deploy them.
And they're going to, so it sounds like they're spinning up their own internal Debian repo of like approved packages then, essentially.
Yeah. I know that's what Rackspace does. They have their own custom repository for all their Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers because the Red Hat Enterprise Linux repositories are usually very far behind, right? They do security updates, but no feature updates.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have, CentOS 5 or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5, it comes with like PHP 5.1 or 5.0.
Yeah.
And they have the security updates, but no feature updates.
Right.
So what Rackspace has, they have their own Yum repositories that have like PHP 5.3 in them in a version of the package that Rackspace maintains.
Right.
Now, they eventually actually made that set of repositories publicly available to anybody rather than just internally for their own customers and for their own use. But yeah, so it seems like DreamHost is probably going to end up having their own little repository where they can push out these packages for things like Apache and MySQL.
Wow. All right. Well, any other thoughts on that story?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, then before we move on, I'd like to tell everybody about our friends at GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy.com, of course, the world's #1 domain name and registrar. And holy moly, do we have some codes for you folks. They are kicking off, I think probably in celebration of the Super Bowl, if I know GoDaddy. They're kicking things into high gear. So first up, you can get a .co domain. There's a lot of reasons you might want a .co.
Yep.
Yeah, .co. Which I like for naming conventions and things like that.
Yeah, and it's also really cool for domain hacks. Or even just because the .com you want is taken.
CO Feb 8 if you want to get that for $7.99. That's crazy. But what's
the same price as the .com. It used to be more, but right now, with this code, you can get it for the same price as the .com. So if the .com you want is taken, there's no reason not to get the .co instead.
Now, the code you're really probably going to want to use is because this is a great deal. And they only do this like once or twice a year. And it's only good for the month of February. But they're offering a deal on their web hosting. If you use the code HOSTFEB8 when you check out, you'll get deluxe hosting for the price of economy hosting, which is actually a really fantastic deal because it's unlimited bandwidth. You get 150 gigabytes of space, 25 MySQL databases, and you get it for the price of economy. So, but it's only good until the end of February. So use the code HOSTFEB8 when you do that one. We have a whole slew of codes in the show notes too.
Yes.
So if you guys want to grab a domain name, .com for $7.99, use TechSNAP 7. If you want to save 10% at checkout, use TechSNAP 10, and TechSNAP 20 for 20% off hosting plans. But I would go get that. I would go use HostFeb 8 and get that economy hosting price for the deluxe hosting. That's a great deal, and it's a great thing to use if you have some projects you're working on and not sure if you want to spend a bunch of money on it. And if it blows up, unlimited bandwidth, you're fine. All right. Yep. So one last thing to mention is the Jupyter signal.
Yes.
The Jupyter signal nears. Now, Alan, you have a hand in that every month, especially with the puzzles and stuff. Do you already have something planned for this month?
I haven't picked the puzzle. I was sorting through puzzles last night, but I haven't picked one yet.
Okay, well,
but I'll probably do that today.
Now, the Jupiter Signal is Jupiter Broadcasting's monthly newsletter. Here, if you're watching the video version, I'm showing you last month's, which was awesome. We broke down a chart of the shows that take the most of our time. And man, look at Stoked way up there. And TechSNAP has got a great, healthy balance between time consumed and time needed to get it going. TechSNAP's right in the sweet spot. But we put this out every month. It tells you about upcoming things we have and special events. And you can subscribe to that if you go over to bit.ly/Jupiter Signal. Or I'll try to put a little spot in the show notes where you can sign up too, because the February edition is coming out soon. So if you want to get that in your inbox, go get the Jupiter Signal, and that's where you'll get it.
Yep.
All right. Well, with all that out of the way, it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thank you for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Or I've noticed that a lot of you have found the new contact link over at the top of Jupiter Broadcasting. Thanks for clicking that. There's a form there you can fill out. Now, Alan, we've got a couple of questions to go through and then the war story. So why don't I jump right in with Chris's question? Are you ready, sir?
Yep.
All right, he writes, "Hey guys, I'm currently looking at various solutions for monitoring several hundred servers and their services across a global network, and wonder what you guys have used, their pluses and pitfalls, and what you recommend. It would have to support both Unix-based and Windows-based OSs." Now, Alan, I know this is a problem you specifically have solved over at Scale Engine, so what do you do?
Yeah. So like we talked about we talked about a number of the different options in TechSNAP episode 20 called Keeping It Up.
That's right. Yeah. I love that name.
Yeah. So I personally use Nagios and Nagios Graph for my monitoring, although I've also experimented with Zabbix recently when we set up some additional monitoring. And Nagios, I found the advantage being that it configures all the hosts and services from files, and you can create templates and then use them, and they inherit properties in like a child-parent kind of object-oriented type.
It is all very file-based, yeah.
Yes. And it allows you to quickly configure the servers that are nearly identical and such because you have all this profiling. And Zabbix instead is powered by a database, which is both a pro and a con. So it has templates as well, but there's a lot more, clicking through a web interface to create each machine and to set up the profiles.
Which seems like it would be good for a noob who might be overwhelmed by config files, but
yeah, or also if a lot of people have to use it, like if you're going to have managers in there using it, or if you have junior IT people that also need to be able to do stuff like add servers to the monitoring. But
the downside is it's going to mean it takes a lot longer to deploy a lot of systems, and he mentioned hundreds.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, also Zabbix has a slightly more distributed architecture. It's easier to run multiple Zabbixes and stuff. And it comes with an agent program that runs on the remote servers and exposes a bunch of data to Zabbix. For Nagios, you depend on other things like SNMP or whatever to report data.
Which is nice because you don't have to load an agent, but a lot of times the systems that use an agent do get a lot more interesting information.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're doing. And I don't know if the Zabbix agent is available for Windows. I think it is, but I have never actually used it because I don't have any Windows servers.
How could it not? It must, right?
And Nagios we've used it to pull our customers' Windows servers before without issue.
Right.
We're monitoring free RAM and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Because with Nagios, we even have some stuff where through SNMP, the daemon we're using on our BSD servers, we exposed a list of packages that we have installed on each machine. And we can actually set up things in Nagios that will be like, hey, this version of this package is on a list of vulnerable packages. So that means that needs to be updated.
It looks like, by the way, Alan, the only server platform that Zabbix doesn't support for the server is NetWare. But they even have an agent for NetWare. They literally support everything from OpenSCO server to HPUX to AIX. I mean, they really have a pretty yeah, that looks like that covers just about everything.
So the one advantage I found with Nagios Graph is that historical data for the graphing is stored in an RRD file, or round-robin database.
Right.
The idea here is that as data gets older, it gets averaged to be less accurate. Because, 6 months from now, you don't need to know minute-by-minute detail. You just need to know what was the 5 or 30-minute average.
Yeah.
And so that means the database grows very, very slowly. Because as data gets older, it gets aged and reduced in accuracy. So you still have, up to the minute by minute data on the newer events, but the older stuff gets averaged out.
I like that too. The other thing I like about it being an round-robin database is other programs can access that and generate graphs for you outside of Nagios. So you can actually throw stuff into dedicated graphing software like Cacti that can generate some really cool reports.
Yes. And it's very good in something like Nagios to be able to say, I want to compare this load level to some similar event 3 months ago or something.
Yeah.
Zabbix stores the data for its graphing in a MySQL database. And so by default, deletes data once it's 7 days old, or I think you can change the value, but you don't want to set it to a very long time, like a year, because it's going to fill your database. And especially with hundreds of hosts, you're going to end up with millions or billions of database rows, and it's just going to get really slow.
And that would pack that thing up. There's a lot of detail.
Yeah, especially with all the indexes and stuff, you're going to end up with, needing more RAM.
Yeah. You're going to need a couple of database servers just to run your monitoring server.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I guess it kind of depends on scale and how much historical data you want there.
Yeah. But I use Nagios. And Nagios has the ability to have additional boxes doing some of the work because, one machine can only monitor so many hosts every second, right? So you can actually have slave nodes that will do some of the monitoring and report data back to the master. Which
is also great, like in DMZ situations and stuff where you want to still have monitoring done, but you don't want to open up necessarily the ports inbound to your centralized monitoring box. You can have like a little remote agent do that.
Yeah, so you have a remote agent that collects the data from the servers locally, and then that one machine can connect out to your master Nagios and report data back in, rather than having to have allowing connections from the outside into your private network.
In the Keeping It Up episode, I just love that episode.
Yes.
I talked about monitor.us, which is like a very simple, like 1 or 2 site monitoring service that is really probably not good for his solution, but it might be for people that just want to know when their website goes down.
Yep.
So we have links to that in the show notes too. But kind of along the same lines of DNS Made Easy that you use, right?
Right, yeah. We talked about that on a different episode of TechSNAP. But yeah, I use DNS Made Easy. And so they monitor our servers that we activate monitoring on for us. And when they detect a problem, they actually change DNS records that we have with them to point that host name to a server that's not down. And so we use that with a cascading list of IP addresses for our website. So if our main server for our website goes offline for any reason, it fails over to a backup. That backup website is powered by the same database. So if that is not loading properly, again, it doesn't check just that the web page is there, but it checks for certain words on the web page to make sure that the database connection is working.
Right, that's nice.
So then when it detects that, all right, the database is what the problem is, so that's why site A and B are not working, it flips over to site C, which has a static HTML version of our website built with wget. Right? It just scrapes our regular website into HTML files.
So then your site's like truly never down, because even if your web server's down and your backup web server where its database is down, you still have some sort of presence online.
Exactly.
That's nice, and that looks pro. That's the kind of thing I'm always, and it's really, I mean,
although funny incident when we had the maintenance period a couple weeks ago to move things over to our ZFS server, our website failed over to, like it should have, to the backup, but it hadn't been updated. So it was the old design of the website.
Oh, yeah.
And so some customer had been on the new website, and when they saw the old one, they're like, the button to get a free demo account went away. What happened?
They thought it was a new rev.
Yeah. They're like, they thought we like discontinued the promotion or something. It's like, no, that was just a maintenance window, and we forgot to update the backup copy of the website.
But when you look at solutions like DNS Made Easy and that redirecting you're doing, and you look at the crazy low cost of even like, like we were mentioning that GoDaddy deal where you get the unlimited bandwidth package for cheap prices. Like all you'd have to do is throw up a version of your site that says, we're down for a little bit, or here's a static version of our site. Put it on
or your Twitter fail whale page, basically.
Yeah, I mean it's really exactly. It's really not that hard to do, and I think it really. And of course, I don't do it, but I'm just saying people could. Yep. Should we move on to the next question, or do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Nope.
All right.
Question.
Well, so the next one comes in from Joshua, and he's got a couple of great DNS questions. The first one is really about performance. He says, are there any differences in speed between A names and C names? I understand that C names cause 2 DNS lookups, but if you already have the record for the reference domain, I'm assuming that an A name and a C name are equal. Your thoughts, Al?
Yeah. So with a CNAME record, if it's inside the same domain, for example, static.example.com and www.example.com, the authoritative server, when you ask it for the CNAME, for like static.example.com, along with the CNAME record that says you actually want www.example.com, it'll also return that www.example.com is this IP address. So when you ask the authoritative server for CNAME and it's inside the same domain, it actually gives you the answer to both questions at once because it knows you're going to want that.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Right. There's a section in the DNS answer that actually says, additional information.
Right.
And it includes it in there. Now, if the response is for some other domain, for example, people use Google Apps for My Domain for Gmail, right? So you have a Gmail account, but it's actually with your own domain name. Like that's what Jupiter Broadcasting uses.
Right.
So they have MX records that point to like dhs.gmail.com or whatever. I forget what the host name is. But anyway, those are a CNAME, but they're away to some other domain. So your DNS server is not going to give you the answer to that. However, because the MX records for everybody that uses Gmail are the same, those are probably already cached at your local DNS server.
Right.
So that lookup, again, is not any more expensive because the answer is already your local recursive DNS server that is actually going out and getting this record for you will combine those two answers and send it back as one answer. If it's to some site that's not cached, though, then yes, it will result in two lookups.
That's still pretty quick, though.
Yes, DNS is the fastest part of the internet, and it's designed, UDP, no actual connection. Try to get that answer as fast as possible.
Right.
So it's not that big of a deal, but if every little bit counts, that can make a small difference.
Yeah.
Although usually there's many other things that you could change that will cut that down by a much bigger margin than a second DNS query.
Yeah, sure. And also, like you said, like a lot of times there's local caching and things like that too.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the second part of the question? Because this is actually a great part of his question that I was wondering myself.
Mm-hmm.
All right, buckle up. Here we go. Where should I redirect people from example.com to www.example.com? I'm avoiding using just example.com to make it a cookieless domain, so I can use static.example.com for stuff, for static stuff. I'm doing it at the Nginx level because it seems easiest. But would it be better to use something at the varnish or maybe even the DNS level? So how does he properly redirect people from example.com to www.example.com?
Right. So it's not actually possible to do an HTTP redirect at the DNS level because DNS happens before HTTP and it's basically a different layer in the OSI model. So it's not actually possible to do your HTTP redirect in DNS, right? That's not actually what a CNAME does. So Nginx is where I do most of mine as well. And if it's done correctly, Varnish will actually cache the redirect for you. But you can also do it directly in Varnish in the config if you want. Although that's a lot more work in your config. So depending how many sites you're doing Varnish for, whether or not that's worth it.
Right.
But yes, so doing it in Nginx is fine. That's where I do mine. But you could also do it in Varnish if you needed to avoid the latency of Varnish going to Nginx to get that redirect. So in that case, it might depend whether your Varnish and Nginx are on the same server or not. Because if they are and it's over localhost, then there's no extra latency. So it's not really worth moving it. But if your Varnishes are spread out and your Nginx is centralized, then you may want to do that.
All right, there you go. That's
and yes, question. Also, I just wanted to applaud him for using a cookieless domain for static content.
Yeah.
Basically, what that means is when you set a cookie on a website, you include the domain name. And normally that's like www.jupiterbroadcasting.com. And basically it says, whenever you're accessing something with this domain, you have to send the cookie back with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you do just jupiterbroadcasting.com, that's actually an alias for anything.jupiterbroadcasting.com. So that means like static.jupiterbroadcasting.com will include that cookie then. So that's why you want to use www as your website so that the cookies are limited to that and the static subdomain doesn't have the cookie. Because when you're loading images from the website, you don't want to be using a cookie. Because once a cookie is attached to a request, it can't be cached anymore. And you want those images to be cached.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Son of a gun, Alan.
That's why the scale engine CDM, when it detects that you're loading an image that isn't something like a CAPTCHA, it'll actually remove the cookie for you to cache it anyway.
Oh, okay.
Although for Jupyter Broadcasting, we load all the images from jb.cdn.scaleengine.net, so they're already on a cookieless domain.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
A great question. Are you ready to jump into the war story for this week?
Yes.
All right. So this one was sent in by Irish Dark Shadow. Now, he's the other Alan. Some of you who watch
the other Alan.
The other. Yeah. There's a couple of them. He just goes by Irish Dark Shadow because, well, he's Irish, and there's a lot of Alans around here. But Al, you want to read his war story? The last one we featured was also from him, so this should be good. I'm ready.
Yes. So again, this is another war story from IBM.
Oh, goody!
So a little bit of backstory. IBM basically has two faces. The one is the commercial side that everybody knows about, and then there's another completely internal organization called IBM Global Account, which is basically how IBM's internal IT department that provides services to the rest of the IBM company.
It's deliciously bureaucratic.
Yeah. Well, it's IBM, right? It's like the definition of big company syndrome.
Yeah, no kidding.
So he notes that the events described in this war story took place in 2005.
Okay.
So there's an IBM location in Madrid, Spain, which is staffed by about 2,000 people at this time. And then there's the call center in Dublin, which is tasked with supporting the users at the site in Madrid. And that
must be.
And every single one of the people at the Dublin call center are trained in critical situation connectivity testing.
Oh, okay.
So the training takes about 4 hours and is followed up with some practical tests and over the next 2 weeks to ensure that people actually understood what this was about.
Okay.
And then they also do, random call recording and so on, just like any call center.
Yeah.
Anyway, so early one morning, a call comes in to the Spanish support line from a user who arrived to work late and was unable to get access to the email.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So the agent immediately started to drill into the specifics of the problem and try to figure out what the problem is, right?
Okay.
And basically, this user simply had no network connectivity to get to her email. So the next step in the training is establish whether the user has partial connectivity or completely disconnected, right?
Yeah.
So
some pings and stuff.
Yeah. So they run, it's Windows machine, so they run ipconfig.
Okay.
And notice right away that the user has a 192.168 IP rather than IBM internal address space.
Uh-oh.
So it's like,
there's some DHCP server on the network or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite unusual and to get a call from an internal IBM user who's not getting DHCP properly, right? Yeah. Sometimes if they're at home or whatever, you get this problem, but not at work.
I wonder if I know where this is going. I think I know where this is going.
So the key question was, is this the only user that's affected by this? Right? Because if there's a rogue DHCP server, it should be affecting everybody or a big chunk of the people.
That's true.
Rather than just one person.
Yeah.
But the user says, no, everybody around me is working without issues.
Uh-huh. Have they tried their email by chance? That's what I'd like to know. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the rest of them weren't late for work.
That's true.
Yeah. So the team leader for the Spanish support desk picked up on that call and decided to call his team together to try to think of what this could be. So in this case, Irish dropped into the call and started listening in, which wasn't very useful because he doesn't speak Spanish.
He barely speaks English.
Yeah. So the 192 address obviously piqued his curiosity. So he checked and made sure that the computer wasn't statically configured with that IP or anything like that. But no, it was using DHCP. So what's going on here?
Right.
So, this is piquing his interest now.
Yeah, I'd start tossing around terms like rogue DHCP server or something like that. Yeah.
And then, they start getting calls from other users in the same building that are having the same problem. And the agents on those calls were able to verify that the users were on different floors than the original user. So it's spreading.
All right. Okay, good. I like a problem that gets big.
Yeah. So basically, Irish now is responsible for a building that is randomly losing connectivity to its users.
And he's of course in a totally different country, so it's not like there's like a ton of stuff he can do. I mean, you only have so much stuff, especially when people are having connectivity issues. So like remote control isn't really an option because they're not having any connection. So it's like really screwed. You can only just work with them over the phone.
Yeah. So basically, the only possibility of what the problem could be now is a rogue DHCP server.
Yeah.
So Irish suspected that the network topology and physical structure were going to play an important part in isolating the problem. So he calls up the on-site technician and manages to get one who knew the building and the switching and how all the rooms are set up.
Yeah.
So basically, each floor in the 20-floor building has a comms room where there's, the switches that connect all the individual machines of that floor into the trunk. So this guy actually had even a map of which ports were patched to which desk on every floor.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah. Sidewar story, I once had to do the labeling for that.
Sidewar story, really? That's a term you're using? Sidewar? Okay, the labeling, that's why I'm so impressed, because that is such a chore. It always gets skipped.
Trace, what? 4 24-port switches and label every single cable.
Was it because you were a noob, or was it because you were the only person that could do it because it was your own kind of a thing?
I was a co-op student. I was a work term, so I wasn't even getting paid.
You were a noob. Yeah, you were a noob.
Basically, it was in the test lab, and they had stolen the switches from the test lab to replace production switches that had failed. And when the new switches came in, they decided, well, they had all been hooked up so that the port number on each switch corresponded to the brick at the test station. And they wanted it to be the same. And so they're like, just in case we ever have to steal those switches again, why don't you label the cables when you hook them back up?
That's the thing. You always make the new guy do, or the guy that's not getting paid. You never... right? Come on, right?
You're not going to pay someone to trace and label cables.
So at this point, I would say Irish was extremely fortunate to have a diagram. But maybe that's just how IBM rolls, I guess.
Yeah. So, as Irish says, he's now firmly into Sherlock Holmes mode. So he arranges for the on-site people to break into teams and each one to go to a floor that they know has this problem. And they have techs in each comm room and another out on the floor testing computers that are having the problem. So they hatched a plan to start on the original floor that had the problem, that first reported the problem.
Okay. Work out from there.
And basically unpatching one switch at a time from the building network, doing release renew on the PC, and seeing if the machine was able to get DHCP or not. So you isolate 24 machines at a time and try to talk to the DHCP server. If there is no rogue server on that switch, then they can't reach the core of the network to talk to the main DHCP server, so they should get an IPPA address, the Windows default 169.254.
Yeah.
If that happens, then you know that the rogue server is not on that switch.
Right. Good idea.
So then they repeated this pattern for every floor.
Oh my gosh.
They
that sounds
didn't
brutal.
manage to find it. So they'd done 5 floors and they still hadn't managed to find it. But eventually, one of the techs ran a test on a PC that did pick up a new release on the 192.168 address.
On their isolated switch.
Yeah. So now we had tracked it. So now they got isolated to which floor the problem is on. And
epic win right there, really. That at least narrows it down, especially on a 24-floor building.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I remember Irish had to rewrite the story because apparently Google Docs lost it.
Yeah.
But I remember originally he had some Jack Bauer references in here.
But he did.
We got a rogue DHCP server.
Right. Tell me where the server is.
So then the on-site guys managed to go around and check every PC on the floor and make sure it's not the rogue server. But still nothing. So now they start yanking the cables out of the switch until the problem goes away.
So they pull it, check. Pull it, check.
Yeah, and until eventually,
oh my gosh,
they figure out which cable has the rogue on the other end of it.
Oh, that sounds so tedious. Oh my gosh.
Right, and they're trying to keep this floor this section isolated because they don't want it to spread to the rest of the network again.
So basically, that whole floor can't probably really work reliably while they're doing
25 of the people anyway, basically.
Okay, yeah.
Or it might have been a 48-port switch, so that's twice as many.
Yeah.
It's actually, the detail of it is not in this version, but in the other story, I remember part of the problem was when the way DHCP works, when your lease is half expired, is when the client starts trying to renew it.
Right.
And so, because with DHCP, normally what happens is the client just accepts the very first offer it gets. So the server that's closer to, topologically will be the one that gives the address out. And so because of that, once the lease was half done, more of these machines started picking up these rogue addresses. So he asked the on-site guy to check the switch for activity. And even though they had unplugged every machine, from the other side of the cable, they found there was one switch port that was still lit up, even though all the PCs had been individually disconnected.
That's got to be it. That's got to be it.
Still the rogue, right? So I question if there are any meeting rooms or offices on that floor that they didn't check.
I'm picturing Irish like on the phone, like, have you checked everything? Have you gone through every room?
Yeah. And he says, aha, upon closer inspection, there's an empty office that has a laptop sitting on a desk.
You're kidding me.
And the NIC lights are blinking away.
A laptop?
So they yank the cable out of that and test the PC that's on the floor, and a PIPA, no DHCP. So that's success. So then they start hooking all the PCs back up and repatching in the building network, and except for the rogue, and everything starts working happily again.
Yay! Jeez, I actually had my money on a like a Linksys router. I've had the number one time this happens to me, because it's happened to me more than it should have, is somebody brought in wireless from their wireless. Well, I got a new wireless router, so I brought my old one in and I just plugged it in. Had that happen
story. At the college, that happened. Somebody brought in a Mac Airport Express or whatever.
Yeah.
And accidentally plugged its LAN side into the drop from the college network.
Right. Yep.
So the airport is now issuing DHCP to computers.
Yep. Oh yeah,
all over an entire
that's
wing
exactly
of
what these people do all the time. That probably happens 2 or 3 times a year.
It's a big enough problem when you end up with double NAT because they plugged it into the WAN side.
Mm-hmm.
But when they plug it in the LAN side and start pushing crappy DHCP addresses out to the network, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Interesting thing though, I remember in my Microsoft admin class, the Windows server will not let you act as a DHCP server in a domain unless you've been blessed by the domain.
In Active Directory, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, why isn't it the other way around? Why don't they make the client in Windows say, I'm not willing to accept a DHCP address except from a DNS server which has been, has its answer signed by the domain controller?
My bet is because the Microsoft networking stack comes up before all of the authentication stuff comes up, maybe. That stuff starts up pretty early in the boot process.
And also, for a laptop, you want it to be able to work at home.
Yeah.
But, it just seems like if you're in a domain and you have a setting set, it should be like, I'm going to wait 10 seconds and then only if I get multiple requests, I'm going to take the one that's signed by my domain.
Right.
Anyway.
So did they find out who put this laptop in there or anything like that?
The technician that Irish is on the phone with starts cackling maniacally.
Oh, what?
Or maybe it's better described as a dervish or derisive laughter. So apparently the door on the office in which contained this laptop, which was the rogue DHCP server,
right,
had a sign on it that read IT manager.
Oh, no. That would make sense, though, because they're the type of people playing with that kind of stuff.
So they managed to do a full postmortem lessons learned on this issue. It turns out the IP manager had taken his laptop home and set up Windows internet connection sharing to let his daughter get on their internet, because apparently they didn't have a router at home or whatever.
What? Are you serious?
Yes. And forgot to turn that off and came into work and jacked his laptop into the network.
Now, that happens all the time. Damn Windows internet connection sharing. That does happen frequently.
Yep.
But what kind of IT manager doesn't have like a router or something at home? Give me a break.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So anyway, because of that, users who came into work at normal hour got their valid IP lease from the real DHCP server. But when the manager plugged his laptop in, anyone for a meeting, anyone who came to work after that, including this person who was late.
Oh, I thought maybe he just showed up. I thought maybe the manager showed up late. That's what I was inferring.
When he jacked in his laptop for a meeting, after that, anyone near him got the wrong DHCP address. And then because of the DHCP lease, once it starts expiring, people started renewing their address off his laptop instead of the network.
Wow. Iris mentions in the chat room that he was on dial-up or something like that, so he would use that internet connection sharing to share. So,
yes, I remember I had to do the same thing when I had dial-up.
Yeah. Ugh. Wow, what a day. What a day.
Yep.
There you have.
And then so Iris's conclusion is, sometimes late at night, I can still hear the derisive laughter, and it makes me sad when I think of those IT managers out there who can do stupid shit like this and still keep their jobs.
That's true. That is very true.
And then my little comment about this is it just goes to show that the methodical approach to solving the problem of basically isolating each switch and testing it is not always the fastest, but it guaranteed to solve the problem every single time.
What about
on average, doing it the methodical way every time will result in faster resolution every time.
Wouldn't you think the only other way to possibly have done it faster was if they had the MAC address of every machine on file, and then they did like a TCP dump and looked for the DHCP broadcast?
Right, but they didn't know it was a laptop.
And in a switched environment, in a switched environment, that's really difficult. So
yeah.
If
you're talking thousands of machines,
yeah. What are you gonna do? That's
so
probably
like people bring in laptops from home all the time, but yeah. So the methodical approach here, there may have been a couple of ways that they might have got lucky and solved it faster, but the methodical approach is going to solve it every single time. And on average, if you do it in a methodical way every time, it's going to be faster.
Well, and look in his situation too, he's dealing with people on a different continent, right? Yeah. Weren't they they were at least in a different country? So I mean, you really have a whole different ball game you're playing with. Yeah. And to have remote access taken away from you as a troubleshooting step, I mean, that's as rough as it gets.
Also, on top of a faster resolution, the methodical approach is more likely to give you a better understanding of what actually happened.
Yeah.
Right? I read an article a couple months ago about the difference between Windows admins and Unix admins as far as reboots to solve a problem. Right? On Unix, you never reboot. Right? Figure out what the problem was and you fix it. On Windows, you're like, we're not sure what's wrong. Reboot. Oh, it went away. But now you never knew what the problem was, so you could prevent it from happening again in a couple months.
Irish is in the live stream chat room, and he says, surprisingly, Mac to port maps were used after that incident.
So that, a rogue external machine couldn't come in over the network.
Yeah. Well, that's one hell of a story. If you want to send your story in, you can email it to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. I'll think on my previous antivirus experience that I've had and working for the antivirus company, because it's not a really great one. It's not a reputable one, actually. Oh. So I'd love to tell. I'll maybe one day I'll share the story about working for a shady antivirus company. But
cool.
I think that's all we got for feedback, right?
Yep.
All right, then that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are the stories that didn't quite make it at the top of the show. Usually we go quite in a bit of detail with those, but we still wanted to talk about them, so we throw them in the Roundup. They're often powered by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and we'll include them in the show notes so you can do some further reading. Alan, our first story in the Roundup is a little concerning for me. You want to cover it?
Yeah. So basically, when the law was passed a few years ago in the US that made jailbreaking your phone legal, basically an exemption to the DMCA, which prevents reverse engineering. Basically, librarians at Congress get to decide when circumventing DRM is okay.
Right.
Basically, that law has to be renewed every 3 years.
That sucks.
It's coming up for renewal soon. And so just a reminder to everybody that you need to fight for your right to root your device.
Yeah, and the EFF has pages up on it. I mean, I can't believe this thing expires every 3 years. It seems like, I don't know. It seems like it was such a non-issue. And also, I think we should call out companies like Motorola, who came out in public in 2011 and said, we will release unlocked versions of our bootloaders by the end of the year. Well, guess what? It's 2012 and we ain't seen it yet. So not only is this about to expire, but we just haven't seen enough progress in this area in general. Even though those two things are naturally related, it's still all kind of in the same vein. All right. The next story in the Roundup is a little ACTA update for you guys, and this one is a damning statement. Check this out. The EU ACTA chief has resigned, saying that the agreement might have major consequences on citizens' lives, and still, everything is being done to prevent the European Parliament from having its say in the matter. This is why today, as I release this report for which I was in charge, I want to send a strong signal and alert the public opinion about this unacceptable situation. I will not take part in this masquerade. Of course, we covered last week that 22 different EU member states have signed the ACTA treaty. The United States also signed it back in October. It has yet to be ratified, and Poland has been showing a strong position for it. Interesting enough, I don't have the link handy, but if you go over to Ars Technica, they don't have a pro-ACTA post, but they have a post that's kind of like, well, some of this ACTA stuff is over the top. Some of it's an overreaction. Here's our take on it. If you guys want to find that, go over to Ars Technica and read it. I think the fact that the EU chief has resigned to make a statement about this is really big. Yeah.
Well, because, yeah, some of this stuff, you know, everybody wants to prevent counterfeiting. And, you know, when you buy something, if it's not the real thing, you want to know that and not...
Oh, yeah,
you know,
of course.
And choose to take the knockoff version. So counterfeiting is bad, but they just throw in a bunch of other stuff in there, right? And you know,
and make it about prescriptions and make it about patents and all those.
Right.
The next story. Let's move on to the next story because we're getting long here. The next story on the roundup is a look from Torrent Freak, and they have a great infographic you guys might want to go check out about the music industry and the media industry and how they've been blaming piracy for hurting their business. Of course, that's been their big hammer they've been using to push through SOPA and PIPA and all these kinds of things. But when you actually look at the number, according to the MPAA box office, revenues grew 25% from 2006 to 2010. They went from $25 billion annually to $31.8 billion annually. And if you look down at the numbers, and again, this is this infographic that we'll put a link for in the show notes, they're making money everywhere, on ebook sales, on audio sales, video sales, everything, every category's revenue is up.
Yep.
And yet they're claiming that 3 million jobs would be affected by piracy. So there was a company that looked into this 3 million jobs claim, and what they assumed is the music industry meant all of the associated businesses and around Hollywood. And they came to look at it, and there's just no way this 3 million number can work out. I'll try to put a link in the show notes. They break it down, and what they really show is it's more like 300,000 people. Still a significant number, but it's not 3 million people that are affected by what the recording industry says. But again, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one, Alan, but it seems to be the actual data shows that piracy isn't hurting.
No, and in some cases, it's actually helping, right? Like a lot of indie bands would have never gotten anywhere if they hadn't had the people be able to find them and try it before they bought it, kind of thing.
Concert sales have also tripled from 1.5 billion to 4.6 billion.
And also, concerts are the way that the band makes a lot more money, right? When they sell CDs, the record company keeps most of the $20 or whatever you pay for an album. But when you go to a concert and buy a T-shirt, that T-shirt is where the band makes most of the money.
Yeah, they also mentioned too. This just seems totally counter to everything they've been saying. Data also shows the entertainment sector employment grew 20% during the last decade, and 43% of those that were identified as independent artists. So, in an area where jobs, in an economy now for years where jobs have suffered, the entertainment industry has actually grown 20%. So, all of this is starting to sound real hollow to me.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So we'll put a link to that in the infographic.
There's another story here. Basically, some people managed to hack Pac-Man into running on a touchscreen voting machine.
That's what the other story was. Good catch. Yeah.
But the important thing here is that they did so without breaking the tamper-evident seals on them.
Right.
Right. Basically, these machines are supposed to be so that they can't be tampered with without breaking the seal. But these guys managed to actually install Pac-Man and convert the voting machine into a Pac-Man game without breaking the tamper-evident seal. So
kind of incredible. So these are
the tamper-evident seal isn't tamper-evident.
These are the voting machines made by Sequoia, and they're used in about 20% of U.S. elections. It's interesting if you read this doc, the ties and the crazy web of different companies that own different aspects of these machines.
Yep.
I'm dumbfounded as a U.S. citizen that we continue to use these. That we had a story. Remember, we had a story on here about 4 or 5 episodes ago about how people were able to flip voting results on voting machines. I mean, we've had several electronic voting machine stories that have just been like dumbfounding.
Yep.
All right, the last story in the roundup this week seems like it could be an earthshaker, but it's in the roundup because we don't have a lot of details yet.
Yep.
But it sounds like VeriSign has admitted to being hit by hackers back in 2010. And a lot of the details are a little obscure, but some people are making some pretty big claims about this one. Do you have any thoughts?
There's a couple things. So VeriSign is the company that's responsible for the .com and .net registries. So
and .gov. And
.gov. So they control the root domain servers for those TLDs. They're also one of the certificate issuers. So they're a certificate authority, and they're basically they're the most expensive, most respected one. Basically, they were one of the first, and they basically bill themselves as the most trusted, most expensive name, right?
Right.
And the fact that they were hacked and didn't tell anybody,
and they
about
charge for that name. Alan, what I think is kind of interesting is the VeriSign attacks were revealed in quarterly U.S. Security and Exchange Commission filings in October, following those new guidelines that were set in place that we covered on the show, where the SEC was trying to get companies to disclose data breaches, but they were only saying it's a voluntary thing. You don't have to do it. VeriSign volunteered and disclosed this massive data breach and just as part of their financial filing. They followed the guidelines.
Well, it basically, the way the SEC worded their thing is that eventually it'll be to the point where the company would be liable to be charged with actively covering up the data breaches if they don't disclose them.
That's what it was. That's what got them to do. Because I was like, why would they voluntarily give away this information? I mean, you have people in here there's people, the U.S. government is getting involved in here. The people in the Defense Department are now involved, and they're calling the entire SSL process as compromised, which I think is a little hyperbole.
Well,
but
this is why we have we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. This document that came out that's talking about reforming the way SSL is done. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, we commented that VeriSign was not on the list of companies that was part of the working group.
Right, which was very
Almost
odd.
Every other major SSL certificate authority was working together on a way to solve these problems, but VeriSign wasn't on the list.
This is interesting. So check this out. In a written testimony to the Senate on Tuesday, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, which is a great name, called the known certificate breaches of 2011 a threat to one of the most fundamental technologies used to secure online communication and sensitive transactions, such as online banking. Others have gone on to say that SSL as a whole is no longer trustworthy and effective.
It is if the certificate authorities follow the rules.
I think a lot of that is a little bit of hyperbole, but it's a big story. So it's one that's going to definitely land on the TechSNAP radar to see if we get some more details on, I think.
Yeah.
Follow that.
Well, and part of this goes into that thick whois thing we've talked about before, where VeriSign, they're not for the idea or against it. They're kind of neutral. Mm-hmm. But there was this talk of, instead of each domain registrar like GoDaddy and Namecheap and Network Solutions and so on, maintaining whois database for their customers, VeriSign would maintain one massive whois database for every .com and .net.
And I think we're seeing exactly why that's a bad idea. Just saying.
Yeah. But my point when we talked about it originally was that there was also this idea of potentially making people prove their identity before they register a domain.
Right.
And to make that possible, it might require this thick whois where there's one centralized database rather than each company doing it separately their own way.
Right.
And so I think that's a bad idea to have this thick whois, but
it's an interesting.
This is just another reason why it's not good to make one company in charge of everything for something.
Well, and it's going to be one to watch with the whole thick whois and VeriSign, and also there's been initiatives from President Obama about having a national ID act that ties to your online identity. And it seems like this thick whois system could be it could be an early way to verify who you are online and sort of be worked into that. And all of these kind of different initiatives are working on different tracks that could kind of come together, and we'll just have to find out and see what happens.
Yep.
All right, Alan, I think, is that it? Is that the whole show?
That's the whole show?
Just a little show, just a tiny little show. It's a big show. Now, TechSNAP is live every single Thursday over at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is... Alan?
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
See, I like having you there in that box just so you can do the math for me. That way I don't have to. And of course, we release Friday mornings in just about any format you could want it for portable devices, high definition, audio only for commuters, you name it. And there's also the RSS feeds where you can subscribe and get the show weekly when it comes out. All right.
Also,
yeah.
Jupiter Signal.
Go get the Jupiter Signal.
bit.ly/Jupiter Signal.
That's right.
Sign up for that.
That's right. It's coming out soon. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Yeah. Fridays. That's it. Yep. Okay. We got it. Okay. That's the show. That's the
show.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.